years or whatever, is actually very small. It's a remarkable fact that the social mobility in our societies has gone down dramatically in the last 20 years. It's gone down not just in the United States, it's gone down in all over Europe and elsewhere. But this despair of escape goes with something else, which I try and analyze in the book, which is the development of the precariatized mind. Now, if anybody in this room has a recipe for overcoming the precariatized mind, I strongly recommend you to patent it, because it will guarantee you a very high income, so you'll be well out of the precariat. Because most of us suffer from the precariatized mind. Because you don't know where you are going, you have to arbitrage your time. You have to flit between activities. You have to network with more people. You have to take more retraining packages just in case that one may lead somewhere. You have to multitask, which apparently women are much better at than us men. But don't worry, men, because now the consultants around the world are saying you must multitask. So clearly we have a chance, if we might be better at women at multitasking. But you know the feeling. You're constantly under pressure to be doing something else than what you are trying to do. And if you're in the precariat, you actually would be unwise to concentrate just on trying to be good at one thing, because you would then lose the options that might actually be the ones that come your way. So this precariatized mind ultimately leads to things like attention deficit syndrome and the stresses that people are having. And I had a chapter in the other book called The Horror, where I tried to document all the evidence of this development. The third A, of course, is a sense of alienation. Because the people in the precariat increasingly have to do many things that they do not wish to do, and cannot do many things that they would like to do. A classic recipe for alienation. And this leads to a sense of being underemployed, because you can't use the skills and aspirations and things that you are good at, and a sense of being overemployed, because your time is crowded out by things that you don't want to do but you have to do. And of course the fourth A is anger. The three preceding things lead to a deepening sense of anger, and particularly that first part of the precariat are encouraged by the nature of our society to seek targets to blame for their insecurities. But also that anger that we know we're faced by a commodifying society. We know our politics is commodified. We know that we are being commodified, and that anger is very palpable among the young educated as well. I'll come back to where that leads at the end. Why then has he been growing? Well, there isn't a smoking gun. It's not just one factor. In the book, I try and give a richer analysis than I'm going to in the next 2 or 3 minutes, but there are certain key aspects that have contributed together to produce a growing global precariat. The first that I'd like to give attention to is one that is relatively well known. With globalization and the emergence of a neoliberalism, it was not only promoting competitiveness and commodification as everything possible that could be commodified, but was also deliberately launching a process of re-regulation. The period of globalization was not a period of deregulation. Particularly in the spheres of labor and work, anybody who refers to labor market deregulation should be encouraged to take up something like gardening or sewage cleaning or whatever, shipbuilding, but they don't know what they're talking about. Because this period was one of the most dramatic periods of labor market re-regulation in history. And I'll come back to that too. But the process did this. With liberalization of market economies, almost overnight in historical terms, the world's labor supply trebled. You added 1.5 billion extra workers, all of whom were habituated to labor for 1/50th, 1/40th, pick a number, of the wages and benefits in the United States and Europe. Now, if you do that, I'm an economist, got a PhD in economics, so I can work it out pretty easily. You cannot expect your productivity in the rich countries to go zooming ahead so that you don't lose out to those countries. On the contrary, you could expect that their catch-up on productivity terms would be actually much faster, which it has been. So the governments of the rich countries were faced with a dilemma, because either wages and benefits would plunge in our countries, and jobs, productive jobs, would flood away to Chindia. Now the politicians knew they couldn't accept either of those, and so they made a Faustian bargain. And the Faustian bargain went essentially like this. As wages fell, as jobs trickled abroad, they've trickled very fast as we know, we will do a Faustian bargain whereby we will give the Precariat, the growing Precariat, a system of tax credits where you top up declining wages. So in the period of globalization in the United States, the earned income tax credit became the biggest welfare scheme in the world. We had similar things in Europe. On top of that, we had marginal employment subsidies, a whole lot of other subsidies, startup subsidies in order to retain jobs, which were actually effectively a subsidy to capital, allowing for lower wages but topping them up and keeping jobs reasonably in line. And you had a period of cheap credit. But like all Faustian bargains, of course, it had to come to an end. And the day of reckoning came in 2007, 2008, and the whole debt crisis we all know about has hit us ever since. Since when millions more people have suddenly been tipped into the precariat. Now the Faustian bargain didn't have to be made. That is the first point. Governments of left and right made that Faustian bargain when they could have said, liberalization is going to lead to a vast increase in the rate of return to capital, because the bargaining position of labor was going down. You treble the labor supply, of course it goes down. That means that without them doing one little bit of extra effort, they were suddenly going to be earning vastly more. They didn't suddenly become more brilliant to get all these high incomes. The measures done by government altered the returns. What they could have done is said, in return for increasing your incomes, we will have sharing, so that because it's our measures that are doing it, we'll have sharing of the benefits of that process and redistribute to society. So don't say there was no alternative to that Faustian bargain. But in addition to the Faustian bargain, central to it was what was called labor market flexibility. Now, when I wrote my first articles on labor market flexibility, Arne may know this, in the early 80s, the Director General of the ILO at the time asked to see me, and he said, "Guy, you're wasting your time, because this subject will be passé in a couple of years. It's going to be some other subject. Don't waste your time." I said, no, it's going to usher a period of incredible insecurity for people. And I wrote articles, I'm not speaking in hindsight, because it was obvious. Labor market flexibility has involved three principal parts. The first is numerical flexibility. For an American, that's nothing. But for many parts of Europe, what it meant was rolling back employment security, making it easy to hire and fire, making it less costly for employers to do so, allowing for casualization, allowing for all the forms of indirect labor that we know all about and that you've documented and so on, allowing for a process of employment insecurity. That story is well known. But in addition, there is wage system flexibility. Wage system flexibility has three critical components. First, you decentralize collective bargaining to individual levels, you weaken collective bargaining, so you allow wages more flexible downwards. That's a well-known story. The second part is less well articulated by labor economists in particular. If you think of people's social income, we receive income from different sources, part from money wages, but part from access to enterprise benefits, your paid holidays, your paid pensions, your paid health, your paid this and paid that, and access to secure insurance-based state benefits. Now, systematically since the 1980s, what has happened is those forms of income have been taken away from the growing precariat, whereas enterprise benefits in particular have been piled on for your salariat. So the growth of money income inequality that we've observed, and that statisticians tell us about, and where the Gini coefficients have increased, actually understate the degree of how inequality has grown in our societies. Because the distribution of access to benefits, which are worth a very large proportion of total income, have actually become much more unequal. That is a very critical part of the story, because you've taken a whole range of sources of security away from this growing precariat. But in addition, what the state did to save public money, I love that, to save public money, they shifted the nature of the welfare state away from the Bismarck and Beveridge foundations, away from any pretense at universalism and social insurance, to means testing social assistance. Means testing which, when I was a student, we regarded as a rapidly declining thing of the past, that we regarded as an evil of an earlier age. But systematically since the 1980s, governments have shifted to means testing social assistance. What this means is that only if you're poor, and we'll decide how you're poor, only if you're poor will you have access to benefits. So the benefit system is for the poor. And we have this concept of the poor. And as Richard Titmuss, one of the architects of the post-war welfare state, said, benefits that are only for the poor are invariably poor benefits. But it's worse than that. Because if you go for means testing, what this means is that you are putting people into a poverty trap. We all know what the poverty trap means. It means that if you're on benefits of X and you go into a low-paying job, you effectively lose your benefits and get a little bit of extra income, but in effect it means you're paying an 80% or a 90% tax rate, a marginal tax rate of 80%, 90%. In some places, there have been many people who are facing a 100% tax rate. So not surprisingly, a lot of people don't have an incentive to take those low-paying jobs. So people like the OECD have condemned the generosity of benefits, because it turns out that if you're forcing wages down and you have benefits that are still low, but they haven't changed, then obviously they rise as a percentage of income, right? So the income replacement rate goes up. Not because the benefits have become generous, but because money wages are falling. It's pretty obvious. So you get the World Bank, the IMF, and the OECD saying these benefits are too generous, because these low-wage people are getting benefits that are worth 80% of their income. This is too generous, so they're etc. But it comes from pushing down wages while the benefits